Welcome you all to the second day of the Gender Data and Technology Summit. While we had an interesting session the previous day, today's session delves into the crucial topics of gender sensitivity and gender neutrality in the digital age. Hereby, I would like to introduce our panel for the session. We have Dr. Soumya Uma, Dr. Neha Mishra, and Dr. Anand Raut as the speakers, and Dr. Garima Pal as the moderator for the panel. Dr. Soumya Uma is a distinguished professor at Jindal Global Law School, where she also heads the Center for Women's Rights. With over 28 years of extensive experience in various domains, including academia, law research, legal practice, training, writing, and advocacy, she has contributed significantly to the fields of gender law and human rights. Dr. Uma's teaching and research focus on the intersection of gender, human rights, and law, with emphasis on feminist jurisprudence, international criminal justice, victim and witness protection, mass crimes accountability, South Asian women's movements, human rights law, gender-based violence, access to justice, social exclusion, and clinical legal education. She has authored numerous books, co-edited works for reputable publishers like Oxford University Press, and contributed over 60 articles to various platforms. Her current research interests encompass analyzing Indian family law from a feminist standpoint, victim and witness protection, examining the intersection of freedom of religion and women's equality rights, and exploring the domestication of international human rights standards within domestic legal processes. Additionally, she is working on a book manuscript concerning violence against women and legal responses in India. As an independent documentary filmmaker, she has directed documentaries focusing on gender, child labor, development, and migration in South Asia, with a special emphasis on the impact of globalization on the rural poor. Dr. Neha Mishra is Associate Professor and Associate Dean in Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal University. She has actively provided guest, visiting, and training lectures for various on-ground programs by non-profits including NCPCR-led initiatives. She has also provided advisory opinion as member All India Committee formed by ABAP for suggestions regarding decriminalization to the Government of India. She is one of the leading researchers on colorism in India and has been cited and interviewed in many countries, including Germany, France, USA, Africa, India, by prestigious publications and news agencies, including Time Magazine, BBC UK, France 24, DW Germany, Times of India, documentary features like Bhed, ETV, among few. She has also authored invited articles in journals and received the Best Researcher Education Award 2016 by Indus Foundation. Now, I request Dr. Garima Pal to take over for the session ahead.
Professor Garima, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Gauri. As we've reached to day 2, session 1 on gender sensitivity and gender neutrality in digital age, I just want to walk through the background of this particular session. When I talk about gender sensitivity and gender neutrality in the digital world are very much crucial for promoting any inclusivity and equality. This involves designing digital platforms, the products, and the content in a way that respects and acknowledges the diverse identities and experiences of individuals, regardless of gender. It further includes avoiding gender stereotypes, providing gender-neutral options where possible, and ensuring that digital spaces are very much safe and welcoming for people of all genders. This approach fosters a more inclusive and equitable digital environment where everyone can participate and thrive. So with this background, I first invite Professor Soumya Uma to please share her thoughts and enlighten us.
Thank you, Professor Garima. Thank you to MNLU for having me here, particularly Professor Anand Raut and Professor Garima. MNLU is a university where I worked in the past, and I'm still in touch with many of the colleagues. So it feels like a homecoming to be able to talk here. I will share my thoughts in about 20 minutes, and I hope I can keep time. This particular issue is of great importance, and it's something that's very close to my heart, close to the work that I do. Fourth industrial revolution is considered the digital revolution, or revolution in information communication and technology. Are there voices left behind? I think, yes, there are. Is everyone targeted equally for online violence and harassment? No. Is there a growing incidence of gender-based violence in the cyberspace? Most definitely, yes. So in my talk, I'm going to focus on four aspects, provided I have the time to do so. Firstly, I'm going to focus on the gendered aspects of violence in the cyberspace. Secondly, the specific targeting of women with intersectional marginal identities. Thirdly, interlinkages between crimes against women in physical and cyber spaces. And lastly, challenges to justice for cyber crimes against women. Low and middle income countries have lost out on an estimated US dollars 1 trillion from GDP in the last decade by excluding women from the digital world, according to UN Women's Gender Snapshot 2022 report. This is projected to have an additional damage of 1.5 trillion US dollars. The report stated that this damaging trend cannot be rectified if concerted efforts are not undertaken to tackle the increasing online violence against women. So this is going to be the focus of my talk today. Another recent survey, which is called the Truth Gap, carried out in 22 countries, reported that girls and young women are the biggest targets of online abuse. In 2020, we would remember when COVID-19 hit us, the pandemic-induced lockdowns all over the world that actually exacerbated and aggravated online abuse against women. Perpetrators who could not harass or inflict violence against women in physical spaces because of the lockdown, they shifted gear and they started using the virtual or the online space. This inflicted damage on many who aspired to transition into digital platforms for their professions or for their recreation and so on. In recent years, we know that access to the internet has been recognized as a human right. UN Human Rights Council in 2016 stated this to be a human right, and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights dealing with freedom of expression was amended to include communication through any media and across frontiers. These resolutions were adopted without vote. So if access to the internet is a human right, as a logical corollary, cyberspace should be accessible, enabling, and a safe space for all. And when I say all, I am saying about women as well as all genders. However, in the last decade, newer forms of violence against women in the cyberspace have emerged. Just recently, on 4th January 2024, The Hindu reported that the British authorities are grappling with the investigation of an alleged gang rape by several men that happened within the realm of a virtual reality game. So this is a new mode of violence against women, where in a virtual reality game, which an under 16-year-old girl was playing, in that virtual reality game, there were many men who came and they raped her in that platform. Although physically unharmed, this girl is psychologically traumatized in a manner which is similar to a physical gang rape. This is an indication of violence against women and girls in future and the repercussions of metaverse crimes. So developments in information technology have certainly been beneficial to us. However, as we engage more and more with cyberspace, with internet, with the virtual world, its power is also deepening the old gendered inequalities. And it manifests itself in various forms. I'm going to talk about some of these forms in further detail. But some of these manifestations are hacking accounts, cyber stalking, spoofing, persistent demands for sexual favors through cyberspace, revenge porn, posting pornographic pictures of women, cyber grooming of young girls, online sexual harassment, intimidation, bullying, online trolling, threats of rape or death via email and other social media platforms. So these are some common occurrences in contemporary India. This morning, I tried to pull out some of the National Crime Record Bureau statistics to have a sense of what is the magnitude of cyber crimes against women. And what the NCRB data is telling us is that cyber crimes against women have increased by more than 28% since 2019. And it has increased 24% from 2021 to 2022. We don't have the 2023 data yet. That has not been published yet. According to Crime in India 2022 by the NCRB, there were 14,409 cyber crimes against women. So there are two contributory factors to this. It could be because of increased reporting of such crimes, and it could also be due to increased occurrence of such crimes. So to me, should cyberspace, to the question of gender neutrality, my response would be that we cannot have gender neutrality in the law and policy when there is gender specificity in the crimes which are being committed in the cyberspace. And when I say gender specificity, I'm not talking only about women, although a majority of them are women, but and when I say women, I'm also using a broader definition of women to include queer women and trans women. But when I'm saying gendered forms of violence, I'm also talking about violence against the trans community. I'm now going to briefly discuss various manifestations of cyber violence against women. One is cyber stalking. Stalking per se is not necessarily sexual in nature, but it terrorizes, tortures, harasses, intimidates the victim through a blatant intrusion into her privacy, with the stalker attempting to establish a relationship with the victim without her consent. And while stalking takes place not only through electronic means, but also a physical space, when it happens through electronic means, it is cyber stalking. It's one of the most frequent occurrences in crimes against women. Following the woman online, stealthily tracking her online, offline movement, activities, surreptitiously gathering personal information about her likes and dislikes, interests, her place of residence, work, study, etc. So Cyber stalking also includes hacking into her online accounts and threatening to harm her. It can cause anxiety and insecurity to women as she feels watched all the time. The second kind of cyber crimes against women, which is very, very prevalent in India, is cyber pornography and defamation. Cyber pornography is the act of generating, displaying, importing, producing, transmitting, distributing pornographic materials through the cyber space. While viewing cyber pornography itself is not a criminal offense, doing so in relation to pornographic material involving children is a criminal offense. Defamation of a woman by damaging her reputation through character assassination is a related offense. A related crime is revenge pornography. This has become very, very common now, where a man releases sexually explicit images or video clips of a woman on the internet without her consent in order to cause her distress or embarrassment, or in order to teach her a lesson. This is typically perpetrated by a former sexual partner or a potential partner for the woman's rejection of proposal for marriage or for a romantic relationship, and so on. In one of the first decided cases of revenge pornography, a man and a woman were in a romantic relationship. Then she ended the relationship. He started blackmailing her by posting her intimate photographs and video clips on the internet in order to take revenge against her. He was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and a fine of 9,000 rupees. This is in state of West Bengal versus Animesh Bakshi, delivered by a court in West Bengal in 2018. Another crime which is very, very prevalent is morphing. Morphing involves unauthorized downloading and editing of a photograph or video of a woman by the perpetrator using software. The editing may involve the woman's face merged with another woman's body with few or no clothes to create an illusion of pornography. According to NCRB statistics, and these statistics are quite shocking, in 2022, in the state of Odisha alone, 273 women were targeted for cybermorphing, 75 women in Uttarakhand, 24 in Tamil Nadu. Total of 385 complaints were registered with police across the country in 2022. Complaints of morphing are registered under IPC section 469 in conjunction with Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act 1986. Cyberbullying and trolling is another form. It is a replication of traditional bullying in the cyberspace, very aggressive form of online harassment, which involves sending willful repeated messages of an intimidating or threatening nature. It was reported that in 2019 alone, cyberbullying of women and teenagers rose by 36%. So, in 2022, NCRB statistics show that there were at least 1,457 complaints of cyber stalking and bullying. Cyber blackmailing is another way. This could be a demand for ransom. It could also be demand for sexual favors. Spoofing and impersonation these are crimes where the perpetrator makes an email appear to have been sent by a person other than the actual sender. One of the important cases of this kind was a Ritu Kohli case, where Manish Katuria impersonated a woman, Ritu Kohli, in an online chat room, and he gave her telephone number, resulting in her receiving numerous calls at odd hours asking for sexual favors. He was arrested by the Delhi police. This is an old case of 2000 one. Cyber grooming is another crime which is now becoming more and more prevalent. It is an act of befriending a woman online and tricking her into developing an emotional bond and a romantic relationship. This is through, consistent conversations where there is, emotional blackmail, there is persuasion, there's pressure, there is a winning of trust, and so on. During the COVID-19 years, there was an increase in cases of cyber grooming by men over minor girls. The NCRB has not identified cyber grooming as a specific cyber crime against women or children, though an element of grooming may exist in other complaints of sexual offenses. But interestingly, the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR, has issued specific directives on cyber grooming. Cyber grooming happens not only in the context of children perpetrated by pedophiles, but also against women, and particularly against trans women as well. They also fall prey to cyber grooming. Now, from my research, now I'm moving to the second part of what I want to say, which is that violence in cyberspace is targeted at women, but it is targeted specifically at women with intersectional marginalized identities. So we would remember in 2021 and 2022, we would remember these terms Sully deals and bully buy. These were apps through which Indian Muslim women's profiles with their photographs were available on the social media, and there was a public auction online. The apps used photographs of journalists, social workers, students, famous personalities, and the contents were very, very derogatory. The offenses attempted to target, defame, troll Muslim women in India. After a public outrage, they were shut down, and afterwards the police investigated and filed charge sheets and so on. Amnesty International in a 2020 report says that Indian women politicians face high levels of online abuse, and Muslim women and women from oppressed castes are at the receiving end of religion-based and caste-based abuses. There are two instances that I want to highlight. In 2018, journalist Rana Ayub was trolled online due to a combination of her gender and religious identity. She received death threats, rape threats, and so on. And in fact, 5 UN special rapporteurs called upon India to provide protection to her. Another instance I want to mention is a lawyer, a Dalit feminist lawyer called Kiruba Munuswamy. She practices in the Supreme Court of India, and she narrated her experience with online trolling in the following manner. She said, "My color is commented upon. I'm called burnt. Connections are made between my sense of dressing and my caste. In addition, when you're a Dalit, a woman, and dark in color, many do not even come forward to raise their voices for you like they would have if you didn't belong to a marginalized community." The response of officials is no different. My colleague here, who's the next speaker, Neha, has specialized on the issue of colorism. So I'm sure she would also be able to relate to Kiruba Munuswamy and her narrative of online trolling. There are no records of cyber violence and harassment against LGBT community, both trans and queer people, but one can only imagine that a combination of homophobia, transphobia, misogyny would make them even more of a target than cisgender heterosexual women in the cyberspace. Third aspect I want to briefly touch upon is interlinkages between crimes against women in physical and cyber spaces. Now, crimes in physical and crimes in cyberspaces are interlinked. They are mutually reinforcing, and they compromise on women's safety. For example, cyber stalking may lead to physical stalking, and that can result in rape or murder of a woman. Cyber grooming leads to pornography and to various forms of sexual violence and harassment, both in cyber and physical spaces. There are many right now, particularly among, there are many of us here who are academics. There are many of us who know that dating apps are very popular with our students, right? So there are many reported instances of young women who are lured through dating websites into face-to-face meeting with the perpetrator. And when they meet the perpetrator comes there with a group of friends, and then either he rapes her or there is a gang rape. In an instance of combined cyber and physical violence, there was an orthopedic surgeon who lured women to his farmhouse, and there he forced them to perform sexual acts. He photographed them, videographed them through his assistants, and then he posted them in pornographic websites as materials for adult entertainment for commercial purposes. He was convicted under various provisions of law. But this is just to say that there is a connection between cyber crimes and crimes in physical spaces against women. Indian criminal law tends to focus on physical violence and injuries or harm caused to the human body. But increasingly, cyber crimes intersect with physical crimes, particularly in the case of violence against women, patriarchy and violence as an assertion and expression of dominance in the physical spaces, whether they are homes, workplaces, public spaces. This is then extended to the cyberspace. I'm briefly going to touch upon the fourth aspect, which is challenges to justice. We can take it up more for discussion, but I'm just going to highlight, since I'm running short of time, some of the challenges to justice. First challenge that I would see in terms of challenges to justice for cyber crimes against women involves the interplay of a whole labyrinth of legislations. We have the Indian Penal Code and the Information Technology Act. These are the two main acts. But these have to be read with POCSO. They have to be read with POSH, which is the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act. They have to be read with Indecent Representation of Women Act. They have to be read with Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. They also have to be read with Prevention of Atrocities Act against scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. So this legal landscape is confusing, not only for lay persons, but also for the police and investigating officers and the prosecutors. So that's one major challenge. Second is technological challenges, because technology is continuously evolving. How much is law going to keep pace with that? Not only law, but rules, practices, protocols which are in place. And many cyber crimes against women are perpetrated by tools like malware, botnets, onion routing, VPN, which is virtual private network, dark web. All of these allow for anonymity to the perpetrator of cyber crimes. So they bypass cyber security walls and they make it more difficult to trace the crime. And if the crime can't be traced and attributed to the perpetrator, obviously the concerned woman is not going to get justice. So this is a second area of challenge. Third area is, of course, low reporting of crimes. So the official NCRB statistics are based on complaints which are registered with the police. But we should know that that's only a tip of the iceberg, because most cases of cyber crimes against women go unreported because of fear of reprisals, stigma, victim blaming, and so on. In the workplace, when there are cyber sexual harassment, then the victims may approach the internal complaints committee as well. The fourth area is institutional barriers and access to justice for women with marginalized identities. While non-reporting of crimes for women is itself a challenge for women with marginalized identities, it becomes even more of a challenge. So in conclusion, I think women and girls need to be more aware, and skills have to be developed at protecting themselves from cyber crimes. Cyber violence is not targeted at everybody equally. There is a very, very gender specific kind of a targeting in terms of cyber crimes. And we have to keep that in mind when we are developing laws or policy responses to it. Community definitely plays a role in creating safe cyberspace for the women. But in addition to that, the role of the Indian state cannot be ignored. State has a role in ensuring a safe and enabling environment in cyberspace for all women, including marginalized intersectional identities, so women coming from that, so that all women can enjoy their constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights. And this will be available not only in physical spaces, but also in the cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing such informative presentation. I think the figures were quite startling, with so many dimensions and challenges which you have discussed, which we will be coming back shortly. I would now invite Dr. Neha to please share her thoughts.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful talk by Dr. Soumya already. So she's, first of all, I must also congratulate Dr. Paul and Dr. Out for envisaging this very extremely important theme for the summit, and my ever inspiring colleague, Professor Soumya, who is also the director of Center of Women's Rights at JGLS, and my wonderful colleague. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I will just immediately delve into it. Now, UNDP published a study in 2021 and predicted that by 2022, 65% of global GDP will have been digitized. Now, at the same time, as per a PMC report of 2020, it is, and we all know it, it is established that women have less access both to finance as well as digital technologies, a point that Dr. Soumya had also listed out. Now, this immediately creates a gender bias in access to technology. Now, we know now that the world we live in, digital technologies are key enablers for women's civic engagement also. Either their ability to communicate, their ability to mobility. Currently, we're sitting at the same platform in a virtual summit discussing these topics about gender and technology. We go and take an Uber through an app. So it has provided that access. We do the banking through our mobile phone. At the same time, we see that there is widespread tech-facilitated gender-based violence, as Dr. Uma was talking about, which is exacerbated by increased use of online spaces, which were limited in the previous time, maybe a decade back. Now, again, I will not go into the online violence part of it because it has been very deeply discussed by Dr. Uma. So the scope, when I was thinking about this summit, I realized that the scope of today's thematic session in itself is also wide, because when we talk about gender sensitivity or gender neutrality in digital age, it's a very wide scope. It can have questions like, is there a gender bias in access to digital technology? Or then the talk about, is there a gender bias in data sets? Or gender blind decision making process? When you're making a policy or a decision making process, is that gender blind? And hence inherently leading to a technological bias also. Or there is a gender blind design and technology. All these can have direct consequences on financial, job opportunity, physical and emotional well-being of particular set of group of people. And here we are talking about women in general being vulnerable, as well as LGBTQI uh, population group. But I would be speaking today about one aspect of how technology in itself has a bias and its impact on our regular day-to-day economic and social life and access to opportunities, and inherent need to look into that deeply. And of course, because of the sparsity of time and the topic already being discussed by Dr. Uma, I will not be delving into gender sensitivity in access to technology or online violence. Now, just to take an example, a lot of recruitments. Let us talk about employment opportunities, because I was just doing a research project on, I'm so sorry, equal pay and in workspace. So when we do talk about that, a lot of recruitments are now done with the help of AI. The first round and the second round of filtration is, a lot of tools are available, especially with the multinational companies, where the first round and the second round, the recruiters are filtering the resumes through AI. Now, AI is claimed by many companies, hence, that it is non-biased. At the same time, so companies are using AI based hiring tool. They are using a system but they are also using a system, the data of which is optimized to their own hiring preferences. So what I would try to here establish is that system can also learn to be as racist or sexist or ageist and biased in nefarious ways. So in 2020, Reuters had reported that Amazon had created a recruitment algorithm that had unintentionally favored male applicants over female applicants, because the system AI in itself can remain gender neutral, but when you're creating that AI, the data that it was taking was, the system was trained on a decade of resumes submitted to the company probably a decade back, which were mostly from men. So again, in their employment, opportunity was stripped away from almost 80% of the women. So the ratio was so wide that there was a case filed on it, and then Amazon had publicly apologized about it and then taken off that system from its recruiting company completely. Again, Facebook was sued for withholding financial services advertising from older female users. We all know when we scroll through the Facebook what kind of advertisement we see. So systematically it was discriminating, and certain financial services advertising were not even reaching to older female users. Again, so these are the kind of AI generated discrimination and gender biases that we see sometimes in our day-to-day life, which can have wider consequences. This wonderful researcher, Joy Boalam-Winnie, who is now considered as a leading critic of AI, had a shocking study when she was herself a researcher at MIT, who later on went on to advise President Biden, before his executive order on AI. She wrote in her book, Unmasking AI, that how the growth of artificial intelligence and its usage in our daily lives, like job screening or social media and others, was inherently flawed and showed a clear gender and race bias. It was noted by her that this wasn't as a result of any direct malice, but mostly our opinion with respect to AI is that it is incapable of bias. And the danger we have in this kind of opinion, generalized opinion, is that whenever any kind of AI, the data on which it's reliant on is also coming from a very deep rooted patriarchal society norms. And the people who are feeding in data, if the data availability or the sample availability is coming from, generations of where the men were originally there, automatically that AI that is generated through that of facial recognition and other things, it will have inherent biases. So again, Joy said that bias and racism she encountered as a young Black female student was a prejudice which was itself coded in the system. Now, she ended up using a facial recognition. She had used the software of Microsoft, IBM, companies like that. And when she used that facial recognition on her face, it kept saying that no face identified, no face identified. And she was a young Black woman. And the moment what she did was she ended up taking a white mask. And the moment she put it in front of the face, there was a facial recognition done, which prompted her to take up this study further. She did her PhD in that. Then she became almost, right now, she is considered to be world leading critic of AIs and its flaws. Now, the issue was that generally the software of facial recognition for a white male, it was showing the error as 0.8%, while for a Black female, the error ranged between 34%. So it was not even identifying the errors. So in this kind of scenario, when you are totally because the sample study later on it was found, because the sample study, the data and the sample used by AI were of 77 white males. So a lot of times there is facial misrepresentation. And nowadays AI is being used in the judicial system, again being used in social media. Latest is that Google Vision Pro. Again, that is another story. I don't want to get into that in detail right now. But another one more example. So it can, what I'm trying to emphasize is when you are, because of your gender, you can be stripped away from your job opportunities, because one, you may not be getting those advertisements shown in a neutral, non-discriminating platform. Secondly, even when you do apply for such opportunities, if there is an inherent bias in the technology which might be used by the organizations, which are more and more in use, and then in future it will be used more, you would again be segregated based on either your race or your gender. Because the existing data primarily remains of men who were a larger part of the workforce, who still remain the larger part of internet users. Because again, a UNDP report of 2020, which Professor Soumya was quoting, that report, I have gone through that, also says that there is a large inequality between the internet users, between male vis-a-vis females. So another example that is very, very stark, the technologies which we use, which was pointed out by UNESCO. UNESCO pointed out that home-based virtual assistants, when they started out, like Alexa, Microsoft's Cortana, Apple Siri, were given default feminine voices designed to have submissive personality. Now, it is not just me saying it, UNESCO has already pointed it out. And therefore, later on, there was a change in that where male voices were also used. But how you see when somebody is following the command, the voice that is given is of a submissive, female voice. However, IBM's Watson, when they used while they used a masculine voice while working with physicians on cancer treatment, here male voices were used, perceived to be more authoritative and assertive. This shows there is a how technologies are also gendered, which are creating a bias. Most of these softwares were giving voices of nurses as a female, but the doctor voice will remain of a male. So there is another very interesting case of humanoid robot. It's a very famous robot which is named as Sophia, Sophia. So it is from Hanson's Robotics. Now, this Sophia humanoid robot was made to look exceptionally attractive, evoking a sense of mechanico-eroticism. Similarly, humanoid robots are often given Asian or Caucasian features, female features. For some reasons, although robots' work has got nothing to do with they looking like a perfect female with lipstick on and eyelashes, but a lot of times such robots are given these features and are hypersexualized. Now, various form of gender-based violence, as Dr. Uma was saying, gender-based violence, women who face in not only public sphere but also private sphere, they are very much, I feel, mirrored in how feminized form of AI are also treated. There is also a very interesting study. Because of the paucity of time, I'll not go too much into the detail. A person had done the study of what these Alexa, Siri, and Cortana's responses were when you are verbally abusing them. And it was seen that Google's, I'm forgetting what is that, Google's is, I think, Alexa, the automated person who responds back to you, if I'm not wrong. I don't know the Google. No, it's Hey Google only, if I'm not wrong. Alexa is different. I'm so sorry about that. So Alexa and Siri, when they were verbally abused, there was a whole study created on that. It is available online. I'll give you links for that too, if in case anybody is interested. There were verbal abuses, which I'll not speak now, used. The responses to that, which were feeded for questions, were very, were, so as to say subtly, were kind of on the naughtier range and submissive range. Instead of saying, Google, although had more neutral response, like, I would not like to talk about that. So these are the things which can be feeded into the technology, because what you hear is what you are seeing and then establishing as a norm. And the moment you establish that, there is nothing called as then gender sensitivity and neutrality. Because the moment you do not accept, you accept these kind of things which are inherently biased or inherently creating, discrimination, the sensitivity part of that goes off. So very briefly, what can be done to maybe make this process more inclusive is that there has to be gender relevant database and statistics. As Professor Soumya was saying, that, in itself, you have to take NCRB and such data with a caveat that half of the people are not even going and filing the complaints. So similarly, if you are using a data which is not gender relevant database, you're surely not able to create technologies which are gender sensitive. Again, gender mainstreaming in planning. You can do, policy makers or policy stakeholders can look into gender impact assessment, which is, I think, very, very important part, which is generally overlooked. There is also concept of co-design. So whenever data is being used, there has to be male, female, LGBTQI affected parties need to be involved in the designing process, and feedback is very, very important. And therefore, and lastly, I think equality by default, which is very significant. There has to be equality as a default setting when we are talking about technology. I think this is where I will end my talk. Thank you very much for your patience, and it was lovely to be here. I'll be happy to take up any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neha, for taking this particular session one step ahead. including technology in terms of workplace, which is very, very relevant. In fact, yesterday only me and my research assistant, Ayushman, he's also joined us. We were going through a report, Women in Tech Report of 2024, which got released by ANSR and Talent 500, where 7 in 10 women techies felt that gender diversity in workplace is only a marketing strategy. It's a tool which is being used. So I totally agree to what you are talking about. And with this, I have certain questions for ma'am. Ma'am, you talked about these various regulatory frameworks which have to be developed. So according to you, what can be done to promote this gender neutrality and sensitivity in this digital era?
Who is the question addressed to?
Ma'am, to you.
To me.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
So what can be done? So if we look at what are the challenges, from those challenges, I think we can try and understand what are the things that one can do. So first challenge that I highlighted was a confusing landscape, right? A legal landscape. So if we look at the IPC deals with certain offenses, gender-specific offenses, okay? There are offenses against women, but primarily in the physical space. If we take the IT Act has provisions for certain kinds of cyber crimes, but they are not gender-specific. And it is a combination of these two that is being used. But I think both civil society as well as the police and investigators and prosecutors need a lot of legal awareness on which provisions intersect, which provisions of which statute intersect with which provisions of which other statute. Because as I said, it's IPC, IT Act, POXO, POSH Act, Indecent Representation of Women Act, Transgender Persons Act, Atrocities, Prevention of Atrocities Act. There are many. So I think this legal landscape is confusing for laypersons as well as police and investigating authorities. And I think more legal awareness is required for this. The second aspect is that both police and public order, these are both state subjects under the 7th schedule. So states and union territories carry the legal mandates for detection and investigation and prosecution and prevention of cyber crimes against women. So the role of the central government has been to send advisories, send directives to the state, but implementation comes from the states themselves. And as we know, all the states are not uniformly implementing these. So I think a lot more emphasis is required on implementation of the central government advisories and directives. So that to me would be a second action point. A third action point would be in relation to the kind of technological challenges that I was talking about, like malware and botnets and onion routing and VPN and dark web and all of this. So in this regard, the investigators and prosecutors require specialized skill sets, and forensic labs are also required. So traditional forensic methods like, fingerprints and DNA testing, blood grouping, these are not going to help for cyber crimes against women. So lot of the evidence is electronic in nature, and we really need to focus on skill building of investigators and prosecutors, getting them aware, making them comfortable with forensic evidence, evidence that is electronic in nature, and so on. Whether it is WhatsApp chats or social media platforms and all of this, I think the police and prosecutors need much more familiarity with this. We may see this in the metropolitan cities like Delhi or Bombay or Chennai or Kolkata. But what about the other cities? Like I live in Sonipat, which is in the state of Haryana. And I have spoken to the cyber crime cell here, and they are not very conversant with the cyber forensic tools. So I think there is a lot of skill building of investigators and prosecutors which is required. The fourth action plan that I would say is about forensic labs, because there is a dearth of forensic labs and experts who will be available in the forensic labs to aid investigation. Because forensic labs are required for preserving, identifying, extracting, documenting the electronic evidence. So that is a fourth area. Fifth area of action is what do we do about low reporting, right? Because low reporting happens because of women's fear of appraisal, stigma, victim blaming. And this is particularly so in the case of young women. So here, I think there's a lot of awareness of parents, awareness of families, awareness of teachers in schools and educational institutions that is required so that they can provide a support system for these young women. So that to me would be the fifth area. The Indian government has, of course, launched a dedicated national cyber crime reporting portal. And there is a helpline also available. I think it's called 1930 to encourage and facilitate reporting of cyber crimes. But how, and it has a provision, the portal has a provision for reporting cyber crimes against women and children through anonymous reporting. So this is a way of encouraging women to complain about cyber crimes against them. However, how much is that portal being used? How far is that helpline being used? I tried to get that data, but I really couldn't find that data. But the Indian government's initiative in this is a very, very important one. The National Commission for Women also has a mechanism for grievance redressal. And in 2022, there were close to 1,000 complaints which were lodged with the NCW on cyber crimes against women. So these are forums which are creating a support system, and hopefully with these kind of support systems, reporting of cyber crimes against women would increase. So that's my sixth area of action. Seventh is, what do we do about institutional barriers and access to justice for women with marginalized identities? The Status of Policing in India report, which was by Common Cause and CSDS in 2019, found that the police force has very, very strong gender stereotypes, and particularly men in the police force have very strong gender stereotypes as compared to police women. Yet within the police force, the percentage of women is very, very low. I think right now it is not more than 7 or 8% women. So we don't know then proportionately in the cyber cells, cybercrime cells as well, the number of female police officers is going to be very low. So if that is the case, then how can we address the issue of crimes, cyber crimes against women effectively? So I think there needs to be some emphasis on increasing women within the police force and particularly within the cyber crime cells. So these are, some of the thoughts that come to my mind. Another area is the NCRB reports themselves, the statistics. The statistics are not telling us in terms of cyber crimes against women as to how many of those women are from religious minorities or from, or belong to scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, or are trans women, or, or are queer women. We don't have that kind of data. Unless that kind of data is made available to us, it is even difficult to be able to address that violence. So first step has to be to document the crimes which are happening. Then we can think of legal strategies, we can think of policy initiatives. But even that documenting, if it doesn't happen, then there is no way to proceed. So I think I pointed out around eight things which can be, 8 areas of action which can be pursued. There may be many more as well, but these are the 8 which are coming to my mind right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. My next question is to Neha. You talked about algorithms and AI systems. So how can algorithms and AI systems be developed to mitigate biasness and ensure fairness in relation to gender?
Wonderful. So let me just first say the caveat that I am not an engineer myself. I teach law. I have no background in technology per se. However, as I was stating when I was talking about this, is there a bias in the technology that we are using? Yes, there is. There are a lot of, I definitely am a researcher, so I have research, and there are ample studies to prove and establish it. World leading researchers in AI as well as different programming technologies. There are case laws now, the Amazon, Facebook case laws, IBM ones, which stated that these are the biases that are inherent there within their system. Now, how to tackle these kind of system, these kind of inherent, not in, I won't call them inherent biases, but these kind of biases which are a reason of the data which is being fed in the system, because it is also coming from somewhere, that there is already a data. What we can do is that, as I said, I would just, at the risk of reiteration, I will say that there needs to be a gender relevant data. I cannot emphasize more about it. Most of the times the companies, they are relying on the data which they already have. 20 years back, the workforce which was there, even in India right now, if you see the workforce of women, Dr. Soumya just told that even in police system, what is the male is to female ratio. So if you look at the data of the workforce in general, multinational companies or governmental offices or even political offices, our parliament or even court system, be it Supreme Court, how many women judges do we have? So it has been a constant point of contention at all times that there is no equality or gender parity in so as to speak. And therefore, the data that you are relying on as a population data. So I know research methodology, when we talk, that data in itself is an outlier because it is not catering to gender. if it is not or excluding a particular gender or a minority group altogether, that data in itself is erroneous to be called that this is the data of the population. It is not the data of the population, because it will be an outlier of a data. So data has to be a relevant data. And based on that, if you're using the technology, then of course it can be something which would be genuinely helping everyone without any discrimination. Now, again, when you are making policies, or when you are making certain norms, over there you have to do gender mainstreaming. As I said, very, very briefly, I use a term like gender impact assessment. Um, we talk about environment impact assessment, but for a particular policy, it is very important that you look at a particular minority group, you look at a particular vulnerable group, you look at a particular gender group. It can be specifically, women are vulnerable in the social hierarchy. For example, in our society, in that, if you look at a Dalit woman, her Dalit woman and of dark color and in Indian society and from a rural area, her vulnerabilities will automatically be multifolded. So when you are doing a particular, or you are invoking certain at the policy level, if you say that, all right, we have a national education policy, NEP. Now, if there has been, like, I will just take the example of education system. What happened during COVID was that we all had I'm so sorry, my head is just working a little bit less now. It's 1 a.m. my time. But I'm just trying to still keep my thoughts intact. Now, what happened during COVID was, you're talking about digital education. There was a national education policy also where there was more emphasis on digitalization. In education sphere also. At the same time, you have a 60% rural population, in which probably 40% of the homes have one mobile phone, which the husband who is in the workforce, he will take. Now, even if you are giving some kind of lessons, we all have seen that there might be domestic helpers who might be helping us at a particular time. If they have one mobile phone and there are online classes, and they have 2 children who go to school, how many of them can actually have an online access to education? So similarly, so on and so forth, when there is any kind of policy making process, you need to see that particular population group, what will be the impact assessment on that. When we are talking about gender, what will be the gender impact assessment? Like very rightly said about forensic labs, etc. Now we're talking about cyber forensic. Now the response team, I had worked very briefly with a team of trafficking survivors and the police officers. Along with that, there were certain videos which were posted online with those people. Now, for those victim survivors. Now, when you do such a kind of thing, there were, of course, cyber cells, etc. involved there. And the same things were taken out within 2.5 days. But by 2.5 days, the damage was already done, because in today's time and age, if there is a video which is posted online, it already becomes viral by that time. So even if you have the ability of taking out that video from Facebook, now it is already there with lakhs and lakhs of people on their mobile phones downloaded. So what I'm trying to say is, though I have deviated from the workplace, what has to be done, but I'm trying to say that being equipped and then seeing the impact assessment while you make certain policies, inclusive or digitalization, has to keep in mind the gender sensitivity and gender neutrality. But how will that happen if you know what will be the on-ground impact of that? The data has to be gender relevant. And again, equality should be in default. And therefore, it is very necessary that where you're not getting that data, you incorporate a system where you're constantly taking feedback, where you're constantly using. There are already women in STEM, there are now women in technology, there are women engineers. So if you have those co-designers which are inclusive every single time, or at policy making process, when that process is inclusive, then automatically it becomes a system which is still hopeful. We can still feel more affirmative about the system, that yes, this is a system which looks much better than the previous system that we are using. And while I'm critiquing that, again, I say that with as a caveat, there are many positive steps. Like there are banking, one of the sustainable development goals is, even in India, one of the policy was that to make banking etc accessible. So there are positive steps and the positive side of technology, but at the same time it is somewhere also creating a kind of wide gap, because earlier the jobs etc or certain postings which were probably given access to only through newspapers, and everybody had that access. I mean, again, everybody in the patriarchal society, because everybody did not have even access to education. While I say that, I sometimes counter my own statement. But at the same time, a lot of times technology also do create a certain invisible barrier, and to fight that, impact assessment, co-designing, feedback, gender relevant data becomes very, very important. I hope this answers. Thank you.
Absolutely, Neha. Thank you for this. My next question is to both of you. I mean, whoever is open to it. Like when we talk about revenge pornography, I think it has increased over, I think, last few years across the institution, educational institution. I'm talking about schools, colleges. And I myself have also, I would say, witnessed a life incident where I saw a Facebook page was created, and then later on I get to know that the same girl who was there in the photographs, she got married to that guy. So after a few years, which I got. So in such scenarios, like since this issue is increasing, as educational institutions, what can be done when we are dealing with such cases at educational level? What can we do?
Should I answer this before, Dr.
Any
Soumya?
any of you?
I'll just very briefly give one statement. I think I would just emphasize the wonderful work that Center of Women Right is doing at JGLS under the leadership of Dr. Soumya. Now, see, why I point this out is the more you give access, I cannot emphasize the role of sensitization and normalizing the so-called taboo things. The more you do not communicate and talk about these things, the more it becomes okay to hide certain things. So communication and sensitization, and to talk about that this is okay to be speaking about and speaking against also. So that voicing is very, very important even in education institution, and being educators, it becomes a very primary responsibility that such kind of places are created which are imparting knowledge about that, as also doing the work of sensitization of the students, the faculty members, the staff members, as well as creating an environment of, I say, transparency and communication. So this is what I would add.
Ma'am, would you want to add something, Soumya ma'am?
Yes, yes. I'll add. I completely agree with what Neha is saying, and I think my thoughts are also along the same lines. What can we do about revenge pornography? I think we can work at the preventive level, at the supportive level, as well as in terms of providing grievance redressal or reparations, supporting those processes as well. Now, when we think about revenge pornography, it's basically a man releasing sexually explicit, or it's usually a man releasing sexually explicit images or video clips of a woman, right? And this is without her consent, and it could be by a former partner. It could be by a potential partner whom the woman has refused to have relations with, and his ego is hurt, and then he decides to do this. At the crux of the whole issue is that that person, the perpetrator, has access to her sexually explicit images or video clips. So one of the things that I think needs awareness raising by educators with students is, do not provide this fodder. Today, when the relationship is great, everything is hunky-dory, there may be intimate, explicit images which are shared, or explicit videos which are shared. But who knows how that is going to be used in future by that person, right? So I think it's important to create that kind of forethought among students, and it's important to create that level of caution among students. So, which is very difficult, because while one is in a romantic relationship, while one is in an intimate relationship, there is a complete trust. And to then tell that don't trust the person completely is also very, very challenging. But I think it's important to ensure that these kind of sexually explicit images or video clips do not reach do not reach the hands of potential perpetrators. So I think awareness raising is very, very important for that. Second aspect is that very often revenge pornography is combined with cyber blackmailing. And what is it that the perpetrator uses as a trump card for blackmailing? The fact that the woman's family would be completely devastated, that the woman's family would be angry with the woman, and would perhaps cause some kind of mental or physical harm to her. That is the fear that young women